I think the most important part of any mix is all the things that you do before you start apply processing. And in this video, I'm going to show you 5 things that I do in every mix to make it sound as good as possible, so that actually it sounds good without any processing at all. So let's dive in. So the first thing that I do in every mix is having a system for tracks, auxes, and buses. And what I mean by this is that I will arrange all the tracks in a specific sequence that is similar for all the mixes that I do, no matter which genre, no matter how many tracks there are always one specific sequence that I follow every time. By doing this, it goes a lot faster, I spend less time, and I get better results. Another advantage of doing the same thing every time is that when someone asks 2 months later, can you please fix this and that? I can go back to the mix session and I know exactly what to do because it's the same for all mixing sessions. And it looks a little something like this. So here you see in this session right here, we have it perfectly laid out with the kick, the snares, the hi-hats, and it goes in this particular order. Everything drums here, and you can see it also, the color code is like this. And then you move on to the bass. I'll enhance it a bit. Let's see. Oh, pop. The bass is a different color, so like reddish. Comes from my tractor days when I was using a lot of tractor. Bass frequencies were always marked with red. And all the instruments, they're purple, and then comes vocals, which are green. And this is because when I learned vocal mixing, the ones who taught me used always green for vocals for green because that's where the money is, they said. I don't know. I think that's where the money is though. It's the vocalists. The bass players, they don't get that much love, I think. Although they should, especially those who plays with the 808. And then comes the auxes, all the reverbs and the delays and the special effects. And then finally comes the buses. In the same order, we have first the drums, then the bass, then the instruments, and then the effects for all things instruments, and then the lead vocals, the background vocals, the vocal effects, and then all things beats or instruments is rooted into one bus, and all things vocals rooted into one bus, and all things effects rooted into one bus, and then they will go to the mix bus. This is my go-to template in Logic. I'm currently in changing mode, so I am going to actually have the same effects bus for both instruments and vocals. I have used to separate them, but I have found that it's actually a lot better to have them in one. Maybe I would like to use the same reverb for the drum overheads, for example, or for the snare as I use for the background vocals to blend them better together. But that's a choice that I have to make, and I want to experiment more. And I will make an update to my Logic Pro template pack. It's a free download. At least I have 6 Logic Pro templates specifically designed for different mixing situations. I mix mostly hip-hop music, but the same principles can be applied for any other genre. I use these templates when I mix folk music. I use them for EDM and so on and so forth. Having this structure in the ground makes for more creativity down the line because I don't have to think about the basics that much. So I have the basics covered in the templates, and then I can free myself and my headspace to have more fun mixing. So that's the main principle, at least. And the second thing is that I group tracks together. So I make groups of tracks, like I mentioned previously. I have all the drums in one bus. I have all things bass in one bus. But I can also group, for example, snares. So I have several snare layers, for example. That's not uncommon to have snares in layers like this, as you see here. Then I have hi-hats. They can be regular, fast moving 16th notes hi-hats, but they can also be open hats and maybe other instruments that works as hi-hats, for example, a tambourine or a shaker. They might go in here as well. And then we have cymbals. It could be more cymbals as well. It could be, for example, a ride cymbal and a crash cymbal. They will all be rooted into the same group. So that makes for a neat setup. And then what I used to do is I start with the most important element, and I start with the music. I want to have this thing going in the background before I start tweaking the vocals. That's just my workflow, and that's, even though the vocals oftentimes are the most important part of a song, you can't really get that groove and start dancing without the kick drum. And I think the kick drum is the most important part of any mix, any modern mix at least. I think the kick has to be the point of reference. So I always start tweaking the kick, and I actually seldom do much with the kick. I just let it be, and I just make sure that the kick is at the correct volume. And I will do this initially by having the fader set at 0 at unity gain, at the point where the fader is at its best resolution. And I will start tweaking with my gain knob from there. So here you can see I have -4 dB on the kick. And then I will start mixing all the other drum elements according to the kick. And then comes the bass. And then I will start with the kick-bass relationship. So just make that as tight as possible from the get-go without any processing at all. I'll just make sure the volume is set correctly. Sometimes, if it's really horrible, I can pan like 2 or 3 on one side and just pan 2 or 3 on the kick. It tends to free up a bit space. It's like really slightly and subtle. Sometimes when mixing the instrument with the drums, I'll mute certain drum elements to free up more space in my head to not exhaust my ears too much early on in the process. And then when all the instruments are set, I'm ready for the vocals. And this is without any plugins at all, just balancing levels and using the pan pots like this. In this particular mix, these are stereo tracks, so they were already panned when I got them, so I didn't need to pan anything right here. The drums were mono, and I've chosen to pan a bit with the hi-hats and the cymbals, but anyways. And then moving downwards, we have the vocals. Here we have the main verse. So I will typically start either with the main verse or with the lead part of the chorus. It really depends on the track. I have done a fast job. I haven't really accounted for the volume discrepancy, so I'll just use the fader right here. This is actually a bit controversial, but anyways, I've just done this. I could, of course, have decreased the gain on the clips or the regions, and I could have raised the volume fader up to unity gain to have more precision when tweaking later on in the session, but I forgot. I think I just did it really fast, and then I started to apply processing like compressors and such. And when you start compressing a track, you can't go back and do the clip gain afterward. You can't go back and adjust the input signal, because then you will mess up everything that you did in the compression. Of course, you can do it, but then you will have to go back to the compressor and start all over again, or adjust the threshold or what have you. So if I wanted to be really specific now, I would just insert a gain plugin at the end of this chain, and then I would lower it in volume and then turn up the fader volume again. So that would be best practice, but you know, best practice is best practice, rules of thumbs and everything. But when it comes to mixing, you're in the session, you are listening, you're doing your work, and sometimes you just forget. And it's really not the end of the world. This became a great mix. Client was happy 100%, and that's the thing that really matters. Okay. And then comes number 4, and it's all about panning. So the principle here is to pan complementary. So you think about width and you think about clarity. So in this instance, for example, you can see here with the background vocals, I have done a decent amount of panning on those. And oftentimes when I get, for example, vocals for the chorus, it's often with a bright voice or a high-pitched voice, and it's a dark-pitched voice. And depending on how stereo I want the chorus to be, I can, for example, have everything bright on one channel and everything dark on another channel, and then you would really hear the contrast between left and right, and the stereo image will improve. Whilst in other cases, such as in the verse, for example, I would tend to have the brights on each side so that it's not that much stereo. And I want that contrast also between verse and chorus. Sometimes the verse needs to be wider and more open. Sometimes it's the other way around. That's panning. Panning for complementary panning. And in this case, it's mostly to have the chorus sounding bigger, sounding big. And here, even the lead parts of the vocal in the chorus is also panned slightly, 35 on each side, whilst the background is hard panned, left and right. But like here with the hi-hat and the cymbal, it's more for clarity because they tended to mask each other a bit, and whenever you hear some frequencies masking each other, you can jump straight on an EQ and start EQing. But if you can't resolve it using panning, it's a lot better. You're not that dependent on processors. That's at least my mixing philosophy. I like it when everything can be done without processors. And then when you apply processors, you don't need that much, and they will be more significant, and you don't need to use a lot. Of course, the initial material that I got here was in a state that needed this many plugins right here. It just called for it. But I usually don't use this many plugins on a vocal, even though often I do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and yeah. That's how it is. That's how it went. And the final thing I do without using any processors or anything else, and this is big. This is huge. I have mixed a lot of songs that sounds trash. It's a part of the learning process. But I think the number one mistake I did back when I made trashy mixes, now my mixes are not that trashy anymore, hopefully, is I didn't take any breaks. So you mix for half an hour straight, tweak, and then you take 5 minutes, 10 minutes break without listening to anything, without any other music, without listening to any podcasts or listening to the radio or anything, just silence. And then you come back, and then your ears are a bit recalibrated, and then you continue. So I always separate the mix prep session. I always get the balances roughly where I want them to be, and then I'll maybe, ideally, I will come back to it next day. But sometimes time is of the essence, and I have to move fast. So a 5-10 minute break will also do the trick. So taking breaks is my number one tip for becoming a better mixer. I really hope this helps in any way. Let me know in the comments if any of these things resonated with you in any way. Let me know also if you have wishes for other types of videos and topics that you want covered. I will be gladly to oblige if I have the skills and knowledge about it. I will never talk about stuff that I don't know anything about just to get views. So please let me know, and I appreciate you for staying with me this long. And if you enjoy videos like this where I talk about mixing and mixing techniques and tricks, and not necessarily hacks, but you know, if this video right here resonated with you, I think those two videos here will also. So check one of these. I hope I see you there, and thank you so much. Peace.